At the business succession meeting, my son shouted in front of everyone, "If that old woman gets control, I'll walk away from everything." I stayed silent and smiled. He didn't know about the 80 million yen Robert had quietly saved. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The lawyer, Mr. Williams, paused, his eyes darting nervously between Jackson and me. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, my daughter-in-law Sarah's smug expression, my sister-in-law Linda's pitying glance, even my grandchildren's confused faces. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, but I kept my composure the way I always had for the past 45 years. The familiar ache in my chest reminded me of all those nights I'd spent balancing the books, while Robert recovered from his long days with clients. "Please continue, Mr. Williams," I said quietly. Jackson scoffed, leaning back in his chair. At 42, my son had grown to look remarkably like his father. Robert tall, broad-shouldered, with that same confident set to his jaw. But where Robert's confidence had been earned through decades of building relationships with small business owners, Jackson's came from assumption and entitlement. "Mom, let's not pretend," Jackson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Dad built this accounting firm from nothing. You were just the supportive wife in the background." Sarah nodded in agreement, her manicured hand resting possessively on Jackson's arm. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light, another piece bought on credit to maintain their facade. "Robert always said business decisions should stay with those who understand numbers," she added, not even bothering to look at me. I swallowed the familiar hurt, the same pain I'd been carrying for years. At 67, I'd grown accustomed to being dismissed, overlooked, treated as if my only contribution to our family had been raising Jackson and supporting Robert. They never saw the countless nights I spent reviewing tax returns when Robert was exhausted, the client relationships I helped nurture during dinner parties at our home, the careful financial advice I whispered to Robert when his optimism clouded his business judgment. My master's degree in business administration, earned through night classes while raising Jackson, seemed invisible to them. The 20 years I'd spent as Robert's unpaid consultant, helping him navigate complex client situations, meant nothing in their eyes. Mr. Williams cleared his throat. "This is just a preliminary meeting," he reminded everyone. "The formal succession planning will take place next week when all documentation is prepared." "What's there to prepare?" Jackson demanded. Dad left the firm to me, the house to Mom, and the client list split between us. "We all know that's what he planned." I caught Mr. Williams's eye, and something in his expression made me sit a little straighter. The weight of Robert's final conversations with me pressed against my heart. Robert and I had spoken privately many times in his final months as the cancer slowly stole him from us. During those quiet conversations when pain medications softened his usual reserve, my husband had confessed many regrets, particularly about Jackson. "I gave him everything too easily," Robert had whispered one night, his hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "I thought I was showing him love, but I just taught him to expect success without effort. He'll mature," I had reassured him, though doubt gnawed at my stomach. Robert's eyes had been clearer that night than they'd been in weeks. "No, Marie. Not unless reality forces him to grow." Now, watching Jackson's entitled anger, I understood what Robert had meant. My son truly believed he deserved everything his father had built, without earning any of it. The accounting certifications he'd obtained through Robert's connections, the clients who tolerated him because of Robert's reputation, the lifestyle he maintained through the firm's success, all of it felt like his birthright to him. "The business structure is more complex than you might think, Mr. Jackson," Mr. Williams said carefully. "Your father made some significant changes in his final months." Jackson's head snapped up. "Changes? What changes?" I studied my folded hands, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Robert had never told me exactly what he'd planned, but he'd asked me to trust him one final time. "Wait and see, Marie," he'd said with that familiar sparkle in his eye that had first made me fall in love with him 45 years ago. "Just promise me you'll stand your ground when the time comes." "This is ridiculous," Jackson was saying now, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Whatever Dad did, I'll challenge it if necessary. Mom has no experience running a business. She'd destroy our client relationships within a month." "Jackson," I said softly, speaking up for the first time since his outburst. "Your father built Chen & Associates over 30 years. Don't you think he had the right to decide its future?" My son looked at me as if I'd suggested the earth was flat. And he decided to leave it to me, his son. His partner, the one who's been working alongside him for 15 years, not to his wife who's never even filed a tax return professionally. The casual dismissal stung, but I didn't flinch. Behind Jackson's bravado, I could see something new in his eyes, genuine fear. He'd been counting on this inheritance more desperately than I realized. As everyone filed out of the room, Sarah paused by my chair, leaning down as if to embrace me. Her voice was a poisonous whisper in my ear. "Don't get any ideas, Marie. Jackson is prepared to fight for what's rightfully his." I patted her hand gently. "We all get what we've earned in the end, dear." When I was finally alone with Mr. Williams, he looked at me with concerned eyes. "Are you all right, Mrs. Chen?" I nodded, a strange lightness filling my chest. Robert knew exactly what he was doing, didn't he? Mr. Williams's professional facade cracked into a small smile. "Your husband was a very wise man, and he valued you more than you probably realize." As I gathered my purse to leave, I thought about the fortune that Jackson had no idea existed. The 80 million yen Robert had quietly accumulated through careful investments and what my husband had decided to do with it. Next week would change everything, and for the first time in decades I found myself looking forward to the future. The week between meetings stretched endlessly. I spent most of it alone in the house that Robert and I had shared for 40 years, running my fingers along familiar surfaces, remembering. We'd bought this place when Jackson was 6, a modest 2-story home that seemed spacious after our tiny apartment. Robert had just landed several steady corporate clients, and I'd recently completed my master's degree while working part-time at the local elementary school. Temporary, he'd promised as I set aside my teaching applications. Just until the firm stabilizes. But the firm never quite stabilized enough for me to return to teaching. Instead, I became Chen and Associates' invisible backbone managing our household, raising Jackson, hosting client dinners, reviewing complex cases after hours, all while Robert became the firm's public face. I paused at the bookshelf, picking up a photo from Jackson's graduation from business school. Robert stood proudly beside him, both in matching suits, their posture identically confident. I stood slightly apart, smiling but somehow secondary. Even then I could see the pattern forming, though I'd felt powerless to change it. The doorbell rang, startling me from my memories. Linda stood on the porch clutching a covered dish. "I thought you might need some company," my sister-in-law said, brushing past me into the kitchen. Unlike Robert, who'd been warm and diplomatic, Linda had always been brutally honest. "You look exhausted, Marie." I touched my disheveled hair self-consciously. "I haven't been sleeping well." Linda set down her dish and faced me squarely. "Jackson's been calling me. Says Robert might have changed the succession plan, might have given you more control than expected." She made air quotes around the last words. "The meeting isn't until tomorrow," I said carefully. "Drop the act, Marie. Did Robert leave you the firm?" I met her gaze steadily. "Robert and I didn't discuss the specifics of his plans." Linda snorted. "Right. 45 years together, and he never mentioned his plans for the business you helped him build. Robert made his own decisions." She studied me for a long moment. "You know, I never understood you. You let Robert and Jackson dismiss your contributions for decades. Even now, you're protecting them." I turned away, busying myself with making tea. "You didn't walk in my shoes, Linda." "No, thank goodness," she muttered. "I would have demanded recognition the first time Robert took credit for my work, which, from what I saw, was sometime around 1995. The kettle whistled, saving me from responding. As I poured hot water into mugs, Linda continued, her voice softening slightly. "Do you remember when Jackson was about 14 and Robert bought him that expensive computer setup?" I nodded, setting a mug in front of her. Jackson had wanted the latest technology for months, and despite my concerns about the cost, you told Robert it was too much too soon. Robert bought it anyway. 2 weeks later, Jackson had gotten into trouble online. Nearly damaged a client's system with his careless browsing. "That was a long time ago," I murmured. "My point is, you were right. You were always right, Marie, about Jackson especially. You saw what Robert was creating, with his indulgence an entitled, careless man who never had to earn anything." I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "What do you want me to say? Linda? That I failed as a mother? That I should have been more assertive?" Linda reached across the table and gripped my hand. A rare gesture of affection from her. "I want you to stop blaming yourself for Jackson's character. Robert created this situation. Maybe you could have fought harder, but Robert would have just undermined you anyway." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I did try. When Jackson was in college, he nearly flunked out because of partying. I wanted consequences. Robert just paid for tutors, transferred him to an easier program. I remember, Linda said grimly. And then Robert brought him into the firm straight out of school despite him having no real-world experience. I sighed, memories flooding back. Jackson's first year at the firm, he nearly lost our biggest client with his arrogant attitude. Robert covered for him, told everyone it was a learning experience. And now Jackson thinks he's entitled to run the firm, Linda concluded. He's been working there for 15 years, I pointed out. Working, Linda scoffed. He shows up late, leaves early, passes difficult cases to junior staff, and spends more time networking at expensive restaurants than reviewing client files. Meanwhile, he and Sarah are drowning in debt, the luxury apartment, the foreign car, private schools for the kids. I looked up sharply. How serious is it? Linda hesitated. There are whispers, Marie. Jackson's been using the firm's credit line for personal expenses. They're in financial trouble. This wasn't entirely surprising. Jackson and Sarah had always lived beyond their means. And recently they'd been pressuring Robert to formalize the succession plan, to guarantee what Jackson assumed was his inheritance. Did Robert know? I asked quietly. Linda nodded. David Chen in our accounting department showed him some concerning transactions about 8 months ago. Jackson had been billing personal expenses to client accounts. 8 months ago, right around when Robert had started having those intense private conversations with me and Mr. Williams. The timing suddenly made sense. After Linda left, I went to Robert's home office, a room I'd barely entered since his death. His presence was strongest here in the desk chair molded to his body, the faint scent of his coffee still lingering. I ran my hand along his desk, remembering how many nights I'd brought him tea as he worked late, how many times I'd offered my thoughts on a difficult client situation or tax strategy. In the bottom drawer, I found a small notebook I'd never seen before. Inside, in Robert's careful handwriting, was a letter addressed to me. My dearest Marie, it began. If you're reading this, I've already passed and you're wondering if you've spent your life being taken for granted. The answer is yes and no. Yes, I undervalued your contributions and intelligence too many times to count. No, it wasn't your weakness. It was mine for being too proud to publicly acknowledge how much I needed you. The letter continued for pages, Robert's confession of how he'd realized too late the entitled mindset he'd fostered in Jackson, how he'd watched our son coast through life without developing any real competence or character. I can't undo the past, the letter concluded, but I can try to shape the future. Forgive me for the difficult situation I'm leaving you, but trust that it's necessary. Jackson needs to learn what you and I never taught him, that respect must be earned. I'm counting on you to be stronger than I ever was. All my love, Robert. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. Tomorrow I would discover exactly what Robert had planned and why Jackson was so anxious. The morning before the final business meeting, I decided to visit my grandchildren. Jackson and Sarah had always controlled my access to them, scheduling our interactions with the precision of business appointments. But today I didn't call ahead. I simply drove to their high-rise apartment building and rang their doorbell. The babysitter, a college student named Amy, answered, her eyes widening at the sight of me. Mrs. Chen, I didn't know you were coming today. Is Sarah home? I asked, already knowing she would be at her weekly nail appointment. No, ma'am, just the children. They're finishing their homework. I smiled warmly. Perfect. I thought I'd surprise them. Amy hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to admit me without Sarah's permission. But her respect for me as the grandmother won out. She stepped aside. Sophie and Lucas, 12 and 10, were sitting at the dining table, textbooks spread around them despite it being nearly 500. They looked up in surprise as I entered. Grandma, Sophie said, her voice uncertain. Mom didn't say you were coming. It's a surprise visit, I explained, setting my purse down. I missed you both. Lucas, always the more affectionate of the two, slid off his chair and gave me a quick hug before retreating. Sophie stayed where she was, watching me warily. Are your parents around? I asked casually, though I already knew the answer. Dad's at the office, Lucas said. Mom's getting her nails done. I nodded, taking a seat at the table. How's school going? Sophie shrugged. Fine. Did you finish that history project you were working on? The one about local businesses? Sophie's eyes widened slightly. You remember that? Of course I do, I said gently. I remember everything you tell me. A flash of confusion crossed her face. But Mom said you don't really pay attention to us. That you're too focused on your own things. My heart contracted painfully, but I kept my expression neutral. What else does your mom say about me? The children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. You can tell me, I assured them. I won't be upset. Lucas bit his lip. She says you never really wanted Dad to succeed. That you were jealous because he was smarter with money than you. The cruelty of the lie stole my breath for a moment. I had supported Jackson from the moment he was born. Yes, I'd questioned some of Robert's decisions, but I'd never once resented my son's success. And, Sophie added hesitantly, she says you tried to convince Grandpa Robert not to let Dad take over the business because you wanted to control everything yourself. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. Do you believe that? Both children looked down at their homework. It's okay, I said softly. These are complicated grown-up issues. But I want you to know that I have always loved your father very much, and I love both of you more than anything. I spent the next hour really talking with my grandchildren, perhaps for the first time. Without Sarah's hovering presence, they gradually relaxed. Sharing stories about school and friends, I realized how little I actually knew about their lives, how successfully Sarah had isolated them from me. As I was preparing to leave, not wanting to be there when Sarah returned, Sophie suddenly asked, Grandma, are you and Dad fighting about Grandpa's business? I paused, choosing my words carefully. Your grandfather worked very hard all his life. He wanted to make sure his business continued to help people. Dad says you're trying to take what belongs to him, Lucas said bluntly. A wave of sadness washed over me. Is that what he told you? Sophie nodded solemnly. He was really upset last night. He said you never supported him the way Grandpa did. I knelt down to their level, looking into their young, troubled faces. Sometimes adults disagree about important things, but that doesn't change how much we all love you. No matter what happens with Grandpa's business, you will always be my precious grandchildren. On the drive home, I could barely see through my tears. Sarah hadn't just poisoned my relationship with my grandchildren, she'd rewritten our entire family history. In her version, I was the villain, the jealous mother who resented her own son's success. I pulled over, unable to continue driving. The pain was too sharp, too fresh. All these years, I'd believed that Jackson's dismissive attitude toward me was simply the result of Robert's indulgence, of masculine pride. I never imagined he harbored such deep resentment, that he believed I had tried to hold him back. When I finally arrived home, a familiar car was parked in my driveway. David Chen, Robert's longtime colleague and the firm's senior accountant, was waiting on my porch. David, I greeted him, wiping away the last traces of tears. This is unexpected. His weathered face was grave. We need to talk, Marie. About Jackson. Inside, David declined tea, getting straight to the point. Jackson's been leveraging his expected inheritance heavily. I nodded. Linda mentioned he and Sarah have financial problems. It's worse than that, David said grimly. He's invested everything in cryptocurrency and foreign exchange trading. High-risk, high-reward investments. The positions are failing spectacularly. How bad? He's nearly 1.5 million yen in debt, with nothing to show for it except trading accounts in the red. I sank into a chair. Did Robert know? David nodded. Robert discovered it about 10 months ago. Jackson had been using the firm's business credit to cover his personal trading losses. Using the firm's credit, the words felt like a physical blow. Are you certain? I have the documentation. Robert confronted him privately. They worked out a repayment plan to avoid involving authorities. Robert was devastated. 10 months ago, when Robert's health had suddenly seemed to decline, when he'd started having those intense private conversations with me and Mr. Williams, Jackson's counting on his inheritance to bail him out, David continued, if he doesn't get what he's expecting. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jackson wouldn't just lose face, he could lose everything. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. David's expression softened. Because Robert asked me to, after the succession meeting. He wanted you to understand what you're dealing with. Jackson isn't just entitled, Marie. He's desperate. After David left, I sat alone in my quiet living room, the weight of this new knowledge pressing down on me. My son, who had everything given to him his entire life, had still wanted more. He'd gambled with borrowed money, lied to his family, and now expected his inheritance to save him from the consequences of his actions. And tomorrow, at the business meeting, he would discover whether Robert had thrown him a lifeline or cut him loose to finally sink or swim on his own. The morning of the final business meeting dawned crisp and clear. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that Robert had always admired, my one concession to sentimentality. As I fastened my pearl earrings, Robert's gift on our 25th anniversary, the doorbell rang. Mr. Williams stood on my porch, his expression serious. "Mrs. Chen, I thought we might drive together." I raised an eyebrow. "The meeting isn't for 2 hours." "I know. I thought you might appreciate some preparation." I invited him in, anxiety knotting in my stomach. "Is something wrong?" Once seated in my living room, Mr. Williams removed a thick folder from his briefcase. "Before we meet with the others, I need to explain Robert's plan in detail." He was very specific about the timing. "I'm listening," I said, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. "Robert came to me 10 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis. He was deeply concerned about Jackson's readiness to lead the firm." I nodded. "I've since learned about the expense account issues." Mr. Williams looked relieved. "Good. That makes this easier." Robert was troubled by Jackson's actions, not just the financial impropriety, but what they revealed about his judgment. He opened the folder, revealing a series of documents. Robert restructured the business with 2 primary goals: protecting the firm's reputation and providing you with authority and security. "Authority," I repeated, the word feeling foreign in relation to my role in the family. "Yes. Robert finally recognized that you were always the more thoughtful decision-maker." He came to believe that Jackson's sense of entitlement stemmed from Robert's own mistakes, always bailing Jackson out, never requiring him to prove himself. I felt a strange sense of validation hearing Robert's thoughts echoed by Mr. Williams. For decades, I'd voiced these same concerns, only to be dismissed as overprotective or lacking business understanding. "The succession plan creates a management structure," Mr. Williams continued. "All of Robert's business assets, the client relationships, the office property, will be held in a professional trust. You, Marie, are the primary trustee and managing director." I stared at him. "Me? Not Jackson?" "Not Jackson," he confirmed. "Robert believed you would make decisions based on what's best for the firm's long-term success, not just immediate profit." My mind raced, trying to process this reversal of the roles I'd inhabited for 45 years. "Jackson will challenge it," I said finally. Robert anticipated that. Mr. Williams' expression was grim, which is why he included some protective provisions. He pulled out another document, this one marked with several highlighted sections. If Jackson contests the succession plan, he forfeits his position at the firm entirely. No exceptions. Everything? My voice was barely audible. Everything. His partnership stake, his salary, even the company car he's been using. All of it reverts to the trust. I stood up suddenly, needing to move. This seems harsh. Robert was protecting the firm's clients. "And you," Mr. Williams said. He knew Jackson would try to pressure you into giving him control. This was his way of ensuring that couldn't happen. I paced to the window, gazing out at the street where Robert and I had walked together for so many years. What about my grandchildren? Sophie and Lucas shouldn't suffer for their father's mistakes. Robert thought of that too. Mr. Williams pulled out another document. The trust includes provisions for their education and future security. Regardless of Jackson's decisions, those funds cannot be touched by Jackson or Sarah under any circumstances. Relief flooded through me. Whatever happened, my grandchildren would be protected. "There's more," Mr. Williams said, "about the 80 million yen. I turned back to face him. "Yes? It's separate from the business assets. It's money Robert accumulated over the years through careful investing in real estate. Jackson doesn't know this money exists." "I suspected as much," I said. "Robert mentioned it to me only once, very briefly." "This money is yours outright," Mr. Williams explained. "No trust, no conditions. Robert wanted you to have resources that were completely independent of the business and Jackson." I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed. Why didn't Robert tell me any of this before he died? Mr. Williams's expression softened. "He said you might have tried to talk him out of it, that you'd spent a lifetime keeping the peace, making excuses for Jackson's behavior." That stung, partly because it was true. I had spent decades smoothing things over, making excuses, trying to protect the fragile harmony of our family. "There's a final letter," Mr. Williams added, pulling a sealed envelope from the folder. "Robert asked me to give this to you before the meeting." My name was written on the front in Robert's bold, confident handwriting. I took it with trembling fingers but didn't open it. Some things were too private to share, even with Mr. Williams. "What do you think Jackson will do?" I asked instead. "He'll be angry," Mr. Williams said bluntly. "Probably threatening. Almost certainly he'll try to intimidate you into changing the terms. And if that doesn't work, he might try to contest, despite the forfeiture clause. He'll claim you manipulated Robert during his illness, that Robert wasn't thinking clearly. I felt a flare of indignation. Robert was sharp until the very end. We have extensive documentation of his mental competence, Mr. Williams assured me. Multiple witnesses, medical evaluations. Jackson won't succeed in a contest, but he could make things very unpleasant. I thought of my grandchildren, of the lies Sarah had already told them. How much worse would it get if Jackson declared war? What would you advise? I asked. Mr. Williams considered the question carefully. Robert believed Jackson needed to face real consequences for the first time in his life. That without that experience, he'd never mature into the man he could become. And you? I think Robert was right, he said simply. But I also think you need to prepare yourself for the aftermath. Jackson won't accept this quietly. I glanced at the clock. We had an hour before we needed to leave for the meeting. An hour for me to decide whether I would follow through with Robert's difficult plan, or find some compromise to maintain the peace as I'd done my entire life. I'd like a few minutes alone if you don't mind, I said. After Mr. Williams stepped outside, I opened Robert's letter with unsteady hands. His familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. My dearest Marie, it began. By now, Williams has explained everything. You're probably wondering if I've lost my mind, putting you in this position. The truth is, I finally found it. For 45 years, you've been the backbone of this family. The quiet wisdom I relied on but rarely acknowledged. Publicly, I took advantage of your generosity, your willingness to step back and let me take credit. I failed Jackson even more completely. I gave him everything except what he truly needed: boundaries, consequences, the chance to earn his own success. Now he's a man who takes what he wants without thought for others, who believes he's entitled to the benefits of other people's work. I can't undo the past, but I can try to shape the future. Jackson needs to learn what I never taught him, and you need to claim the respect you've earned through a lifetime of wisdom and sacrifice. It won't be easy. He'll fight. He'll rage. He'll try every manipulation he's ever learned. But Marie, my love, you are stronger than you know. You've always been the true leader in our family. It's time for everyone else to see it too. All my love, now and always, Robert. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my heart. Then I dried my tears, reapplied my lipstick, and went to tell Mr. Williams I was ready. Robert was right. It was time to stop making excuses. Time to stop smoothing things over. For Jackson's sake, as much as my own, it was time to stand firm. The conference room at Williams & Partners was filled to capacity. Jackson and Sarah sat directly across from me, both dressed impeccably Jackson in a charcoal suit that matched his stormy expression. Sarah in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Linda sat beside me, her presence a silent show of support. Various family members and business associates lined the walls, their curious gazes darting between Jackson and me. Jackson leaned across the table. "You look confident, Mom," he said quietly. His voice pitched so only I could hear. "Did you and Dad plan something behind my back during his final days?" I met his gaze steadily. "Your father was clear-minded until the end, Jackson." His eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." Mr. Williams entered the room accompanied by two associates carrying stacks of documents. He nodded solemnly to the assembled group. "Thank you all for coming. We're here for the formal discussion of Robert Chen's business succession plan. Before we begin, I want to clarify that Mr. Chen revised his succession planning 10 months ago with multiple witnesses present, including his physician, who attested to his mental competence." Jackson shifted in his chair, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Mr. Williams adjusted his glasses and began reading the formal business preamble. I barely heard the words, focusing instead on my son's face. Despite everything I'd learned, despite his selfishness and poor choices, my heart ached for what was coming. No mother wants to see her child struggle, even when that struggle is necessary. "Now, to the business structure," Mr. Williams said, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "Robert Chen established the Chen Family Business Trust, into which all firm assets, client relationships, and business properties have been placed." Jackson nodded impatiently. This much he had expected. "The managing trustee of this trust, with full authority over all business decisions, client relationships, and firm management, is Marie Chen." A shocked murmur rippled through the room. Jackson's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Mr. Williams said firmly. "Mrs. Chen has sole authority as managing trustee. Sarah gripped Jackson's arm. What about Jackson? He's the son, the trained accountant. Jackson Chen, Mr. Williams continued, will retain his position as senior associate, reporting directly to the management board, which will be chaired by Mrs. Chen. Jackson's face had transformed from shock to fury. This is insane. My mother knows nothing about running an accounting firm. Dad built that business. I worked alongside him for 15 years, and now you're telling me she's in charge. Your father's decision was quite clear, Mr. Williams said calmly. My father was dying, Jackson snapped. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mom obviously manipulated him when he was vulnerable. I flinched at the accusation but kept my composure. Jackson, please. No! He slammed his hand on the table. I will not let you steal what's rightfully mine. I'll contest this. I'll fight it with everything I have. Mr. Williams cleared his throat. Before you make that decision, Mr. Chen, you should be aware of the challenge clause. The what? Jackson demanded. If any beneficiary contests this succession plan or attempts to interfere with the administration of the trust, they forfeit all benefits completely and permanently. Jackson laughed incredulously. You're bluffing. Mr. Williams silently passed him the relevant document. I watched as Jackson scanned it, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. This is crazy, he whispered. He's cutting me out if I object to this travesty. Not cutting you out, Mr. Williams corrected. The trust provides for your continued employment and a reasonable salary, provided you fulfill your professional obligations satisfactorily. But yes, if you contest the succession plan, you forfeit everything, including your position at the firm. Jackson turned to me, his eyes blazing. You did this. You turned him against me. I shook my head sadly. No, Jackson. Your actions did that. Confusion flickered across his face. Your father knew about the expense account misuse, I said quietly. He knew about the FX trading losses, the 1.5 million yen debt, all of it. Jackson paled further, his gaze darting around the room. Some of the business associates shifted uncomfortably, clearly hearing this information for the first time. That's a lie, he hissed. David Chen provided him with the documentation, I continued, my voice steady despite my breaking heart. Your father protected you from legal consequences, but he couldn't ignore what it revealed about your judgment. Sarah was looking at Jackson with growing alarm. What is she talking about? What expense account misuse? Jackson ignored her, focusing his rage on me. You had no right to discuss my personal business in front of everyone. These are the people whose trust you violated, I replied. The firm that's been supporting your lifestyle could have faced serious consequences from your actions. Enough, Jackson stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be lectured by a woman who's never worked a professional day in her life. Dad built that firm. I helped it grow. You have no right to any of it, Mr. Williams interjected. There's more to the plan that you need to hear, Mr. Chen. Jackson waved dismissively. I don't care. This is going to court. Mom can enjoy her little power trip for now, but it won't last. As he turned to leave, Mr. Williams's next words stopped him cold. In addition to the business assets, Robert Chen had personal investments valued at approximately 80 million yen. Jackson froze, turning slowly back to the table. What did you say? 80 million yen in personal investments, separate from the business, Mr. Williams repeated, accumulated over the past 25 years. Jackson sank back into his chair, his expression unreadable. And I suppose that goes into this trust too? No, Mr. Williams said simply. That amount is bequeathed directly to Mrs. Chen with no restrictions or conditions. The room fell completely silent. Jackson stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. 80 million yen, he said flatly. Dad left you 80 million yen outright. I nodded, maintaining my composure even as my heart raced. He did. Jackson laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. All these years you played the humble wife, the supportive spouse who sacrificed everything for Dad's career. And all along, you were just waiting to take control. That's not true, I said quietly. I never wanted this, Jackson. I only wanted our family to stay together. Our family? He spat. There is no family anymore. You've destroyed that. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Jackson, don't be rash. We need to think about this. He rounded on her. Think about what? How my mother has stolen my inheritance? Think about our situation, she said tensely, her eyes darting to the watching crowd. This isn't the place for this discussion. Jackson ignored her, focusing his rage on me. I'll fight this. I don't care what that challenge clause says. No court will uphold this theft. Mr. Williams cleared his throat. The trust also includes provisions for Sophie and Lucas's education and future security. Those funds cannot be accessed by anyone but them, regardless of any challenges to the succession plan. Jackson's face contorted with fury. So you're bribing my children now? Trying to turn them against me too? No, I said firmly. Your father and I wanted to ensure their future no matter what happens. Their future is my responsibility, not yours, Jackson snapped. You think you can buy their loyalty with trust funds? I met his gaze steadily. This isn't about loyalty, Jackson. It's about security. It's about making sure that your children don't suffer for any financial difficulties you might face. The implication hung in the air between us. Jackson knew I knew exactly how precarious his finances were, how close he was to losing everything. This meeting is over, he said finally, standing again. Come on, Sarah. We're leaving. As they stormed out, the room erupted in murmurs. I sat perfectly still, Robert's letter a reassuring weight in my pocket. The hardest part was done. Now came the aftermath. 4 months passed slowly. The initial shock of the succession meeting had rippled through our family and business community like a stone thrown into still water, creating waves that continued to spread outward. Jackson had consulted 3 different attorneys, all of whom told him the same thing: the succession plan was legally sound. Robert had been methodical in documenting his mental competence, his reasons for the unusual arrangement, and Jackson's financial misdeeds. Any challenge would not only fail, but would trigger the forfeiture clause, leaving Jackson with nothing. I spent those months learning about the firm I now led. David Chen became my closest advisor, patiently explaining the business Robert and I had built together, but that I had always viewed from the sidelines. To my surprise, much of it came naturally to me. Years of listening to Robert's case discussions, reviewing complex situations during our evening talks, and offering quiet insights had given me a foundation I hadn't realized I possessed. The firm's employees adapted to my leadership with varying degrees of acceptance. Some were openly skeptical, others cautiously supportive. I made no dramatic changes, focusing instead on steady, thoughtful management, exactly what Robert would have wanted. Jackson had been conspicuously absent from both the office and family gatherings. According to Linda, who somehow always knew everything, he and Sarah were exploring their options, which I suspected meant they were desperately trying to figure out how to manage their crushing debt without the inheritance they'd been counting on. I hadn't seen my grandchildren since that phone call. The silence from them was the most painful part of this entire ordeal. On a quiet winter morning, I was reviewing client files in Robert's old home office. My office now, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors. Opening the front door, I found Jackson standing on the porch, alone. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a humility in his posture that I'd never seen before. Jackson? I said, surprise making my voice catch. I wasn't expecting you. Can I come in? He asked, his tone lacking its usual confidence. I stepped aside, motioning him into the living room. He sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, declining my offer of tea. How are you? I asked when the silence stretched too long. He laughed hollowly. How do you think? My life is falling apart. I waited, sensing he hadn't come just to tell me that. We lost the apartment, he said finally. The landlord terminated our lease last week because of unpaid rent. Though I'd been expecting this news, hearing it still hurt. I'm sorry, Jackson. Are you? He asked, but without the venom I'd expected. It's what Dad wanted, isn't it? For me to lose everything. I shook my head. Your father wanted you to understand the value of what you had. He wanted you to become the man he knew you could be. Jackson stared at his hands. We're staying with Sarah's sister for now. It's humbling, to say the least. The children? I asked, trying to keep the eagerness from my voice. They're confused, angry. They don't understand why we had to leave our home, why they had to change schools. Guilt twisted in my stomach. Jackson, I never wanted them to suffer. I know, he said quietly, surprising me. Sarah told me about your phone call, about what you said to the kids. I tensed, unsure where this was going. You didn't turn them against me, he continued. You could have, but you didn't. Even after everything I said about you. I reached across the coffee table, tentatively placing my hand on his. You're my son. No matter what, that doesn't change. Jackson's eyes filled with tears, something I hadn't seen since he was a child. I've made such a mess of everything, Mom. The firm, my marriage, my children's security. It's not too late to fix things, I said gently. He looked up sharply. Is that why you think I'm here? To beg for money? No, I said honestly. I think you're here because you're my son and you're in pain. Jackson seemed to deflate, the last of his defensive anger dissipating. Sarah left, he said abruptly. She's filing for divorce. Says she didn't sign up for financial ruin. Despite everything Sarah had done, I felt a pang of sympathy for Jackson. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He asked again. And this time there was genuine curiosity in his voice. After how she treated you, how she kept the kids from you. I'm sorry for your pain, I clarified, and for what this means for Sophie and Lucas. Jackson nodded slowly. They're asking about you, you know. Especially since Sarah left. They want to know if the things she told them were true. Hope fluttered in my chest. And what did you tell them? The truth, he said simply. That their grandmother is a good person who loves them very much. That I've been unfair to you. Tears pricked at my eyes. I'd like to see them if that's possible. That's partly why I'm here, Jackson admitted. They need stability right now. People they can count on. The unspoken request hung between us. They're always welcome here, I assured him. And so are you, Jackson. He nodded, eyes downcast. I don't know what happens next, Mom. I've lost almost everything. My marriage, my home. Probably my position at the firm too, once the board realizes how badly I've mismanaged my responsibilities. I considered my next words carefully. Your father left the firm in my control because he trusted my judgment. If I judge that you deserve another chance, a real one, would you be willing to earn it? Truly earn it this time? Jackson looked up, a flicker of his old defensiveness crossing his face. What does that mean? It means starting over, I said firmly. A junior position, reduced salary, regular supervision of your work. It means proving yourself not as Robert Chen's son, but as an employee who brings value to the firm. He was quiet for a long moment. And if I refuse? Then that's your choice, I said simply. The trust provides for Sophie and Lucas regardless. You won't starve, but you won't have the life you've become accustomed to either. Jackson stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the small garden where he'd played as a child. Dad really thought this through, didn't he? He did, I confirmed. He loved you, Jackson, enough to finally give you what you actually needed. Not just what you wanted. Jackson turned back to me, his expression more vulnerable than I'd seen since he was a boy. And you, Mom? After everything I've said and done, how can you still be willing to help me? I rose and joined him by the window. Because I'm your mother. And because I believe people can change when they have to. Even someone as selfish as me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Especially you, I said, touching his cheek gently. Because underneath everything, you're still the boy who cried when his pet hamster died, who gave his lunch money to a classmate who'd forgotten theirs, who held your newborn daughter like she was made of precious glass. Tears slid down Jackson's face. I don't deserve another chance. Maybe not, I agreed, but you're getting one anyway. What you do with it is up to you. 2 weeks later, Jackson moved back into his childhood room with Sophie and Lucas. He started work as a junior associate, a significant step down from his former partnership track, but a position where he could learn the business properly, the way he should have decades ago. The transition wasn't easy. There were days when Jackson's old entitlement surfaced, when he bristled at taking direction from colleagues who had once been his equals. But slowly, incrementally, he began to change. The real joy came from having my grandchildren nearby. Sophie and Lucas spent afternoons with me after school, gradually letting go of the false narrative Sarah had created. We worked on homework together, tended the small garden, and really talked about their lives, their feelings, their hopes for the future. Grandma? Sophie asked one evening as we prepared dinner together. Are you and Dad going to be okay now? I looked through the window to where Jackson was helping Lucas with his math homework, his face patient and focused in a way I'd rarely seen before. I think we're going to be just fine, I told her. And for the first time in decades, I truly believed it. Robert had been right all along. Sometimes love means setting difficult boundaries, even when it breaks your heart to do so. Jackson was finally growing into the man he could be: responsible, thoughtful, earning his place in the world rather than expecting it to be given to him. As for me at 67, I had discovered a strength I'd always possessed but rarely used. The firm was growing under my leadership. My family was healing, and I had finally found my voice after decades of silence. Robert's last gift hadn't been the money or the business. It had been the chance for all of us to become who we truly could be, once freed from the patterns that had held us back for so long. In the quiet wisdom of his final plan had come our redemption, Jackson's, mine, and even Robert's. A family legacy worth far more than 80 million yen.